Trump and Netanyahu, I think, are both going to say that they expect Hamas to release all the hostages before the other issues are agreed. And Hamas is going to say, no, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed.
Delegations from Hamas, Israel and the US are heading to Cairo ahead of peace talks tomorrow to finalise the Gaza ceasefire deal. Let's get the US perspective on the latest developments. Scott Lucas, Professor of American and International Politics at the University College Dublin, joins us now. Scott, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me back, Alexis.
Scott, Donald Trump has been talking to journalists, putting out on social media. We're going to be finding out how serious Hamas is about this deal. What can we expect from these talks?
Well, I think, Alexis, the easiest way for me to get to grips with this is to look at Hamas's position, look at the Netanyahu government's position, and where the gaps are there. And they are quite significant gaps. A week ago, Trump and Netanyahu, the hope was when they gave that press conference in Washington was to put Hamas completely on the defensive. For Trump, it was a way of like, Hamas, you give way. I want this Nobel Peace Prize. And for Netanyahu, it was the expectation that Hamas would reject what is not as much a plan, but it's a 20-point sketch over security, over governance, over whether or not we have a Palestinian state. Well, Hamas called the bluff. Hamas called the bluff by saying, look, we will negotiate. We will negotiate over the release of all of the remaining hostages, about 20, as well as 28 bodies. But we also want to negotiate over the extent of the Israeli withdrawal. We want to negotiate over disarmament. We want to negotiate over governance and security, even though Hamas has said we will not be part of the government. They have made that clear. Now, that put Netanyahu into a difficult position because not only Netanyahu, but people on the right wing of his cabinet have really been looking towards a long-term Israeli occupation of Gaza. They have not been looking for a significant Israeli withdrawal. So they want to get the hostages back, but as Netanyahu told an audience in Hebrew just after he stood up with Trump, most of the Israeli Defense Forces will remain in most of Gaza. Now that's what they're aiming for. Well, the problem here is you cannot have that position with a position that Hamas wants, but not only Hamas, that Arab states want, which is that the Israelis withdraw to the borders and that you have underneath this international board, whatever that is, Palestinians who are involved in the government. So that's the gap that we walk into. And it's going to start off with this. Trump and Netanyahu, I think, are both going to say that they expect Hamas to release all the hostages before the other issues are agreed. And Hamas is going to say, no, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. We're willing to give up all the hostages, but we want some definition because it's vague right now. Where do the Israeli troops remain within Gaza? What is the nature of this international board, Tony Blair's idea for Gaza? Who are the Palestinians that would be in the day-to-day administration? And when can we get aid to Gaza as well as a lasting ceasefire?
Are you hopeful, Scott, that a peace plan can be worked out? Do you think it is possible that they can agree everything and then we see that release of hostages? I mean, we're coming up to the anniversary of October the 7th. Many people, I think, are hoping, keeping their fingers crossed, that we see that release in the next couple of days.
I mean, I cling to hope, Alexis, because I think you have to. I mean, the fact here is that the toll that has taken place, beginning with the more than 1,200 who were massacred on October 7th, 2023, and then conservatively, the almost 67,000 who have mass killing of them since then, as well as the threat of starvation, to more than 2 million people in the Strip. You have to hope that there's a way out of this. But at the same time, I think you have to have realism and not just simply what Donald Trump does, go on Truth Social and say, yeah, this is it. It's going to happen tomorrow.
Okay. Scott, just before we run out of time, I wanted to get your thoughts on Donald Trump sending in what I read here is 300 troops, National Guard troops to Chicago. What on earth is going on in Chicago?
Chicago is Chicago. It's a great city. I love it. There is crime in Chicago, but there's less crime in Chicago than there was last year. Chicago's quite a vibrant city. It's a city that has a lot going for it. Donald Trump sending troops into Chicago has nothing to do with Chicago supposedly being, like this place that's fallen into an apocalyptic hellhole. It's because Donald Trump wants to put American troops on the streets of cities who happen to have Democratic mayors. Why does Donald Trump want to do that? Because he wants to be an authoritarian. I mean, all you have to do is look at what he and Pete Hegseth, his defense secretary, did last week when Trump said, we're going to use the cities as training grounds for the American military. We can talk about how to deal with issues from Chicago to Washington, D.C., to San Francisco, to Dallas, Texas, but those issues are not being addressed by what Trump is doing. He's trying to extend his power.
And have these troops been given new powers to be able to arrest American citizens? There seems to be a lot of confusion. I was watching Pete Hegseth being questioned by a Democrat politician, but there seems to be some confusion as to what powers this military personnel has been given in the city of Chicago. Do we know? Is there clarity?
Not yet, because there's a legal issue about whether or not they have the authority to be in those cities, as that question existed all the way back in Los Angeles in the spring. So when Washington, D.C. was militarized, and Trump could get away with that because that's a federal city, not a state city, they spent a lot of time in low crime areas of Washington just standing around at some point helping to plant flowers because they were just a show rather than the substance. But Alexis, here's the key story a lot of the media forget about. The substance here is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers who, without having any defined authority, are walking around in mask, without badges, without identification, and detaining, sometimes disappearing, thousands, tens of thousands of people off the streets. Because if anybody confronts those ICE people, then the American military can have authority, according to Trump, to come in and to use force.
So in a sense, is it too much of a generalization or a bit lazy to say that these state troopers are there to protect the ICE employees?
What we're saying here is that Trump's militarization goes hand in hand with his attempt to not just crack down on, but abuse migrants and asylum seekers, because he thinks that's the way that he can continue to extend power.
Scott, thank you for your time. Always good to speak. Scott Lucas there, Professor of American and International Politics at the University College Dublin. Now, let's get a view of this 20-point peace plan from Israel. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has made an address to the nation. That was last night, calling off the military offensive in Gaza and said the negotiators were being sent to Egypt to finalise the technical details with Hamas. Here he is speaking last night.
We are on the verge of a very big achievement. It's not final yet, but I hope that in the coming days, during the Sukkot holiday, I will be able to announce to you the return of all of the hostages in one phase, while the IDF remains deep inside the Strip in the territories that control it.
Well, let's find out a little bit more of what this all means. Noga Tarnopolsky is an Israeli-Palestinian journalist, often joining us at the weekend, speaking to us from Jerusalem. Noga, thanks for joining us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Noga, what's the feeling among Israeli citizens about this 20-point plan and the news that Hamas are looking to return all the hostages just as soon as they finalise some details?
There's a lot of concern among Israelis, and you could see this very clearly last night. There were again massive rallies all over the country, Alexis, but in Tel Aviv, it was a crowd bigger than 100,000 people in a nation of 10 million. And the expressions are of, I would say, steadfastness and fear. And almost all the messages were directed at Donald Trump, because the majority of Israelis who want to see this war end feel that they do not have the ear of Prime Minister Netanyahu and they don't trust him. And so there's this feeling of, I want to say something like almost orphanhood. In other words, people feel that they don't have who to turn to in order to ensure what they consider their interests, the national interests and their rights. And Israel, similar to what we just heard Scott Lucas discuss about the United States, Israel's in a similar process in which Prime Minister Netanyahu is very much trying to consolidate power. He, as of today, has a new Shin Bet director I think the most controversial one in history. This is the Internal Security Agency, right? MI5 for Israel. And there are immense fears in Israel that this gentleman will be used to try and stop the protests, possibly to impact elections. So there's great tension. But for once, after many, many, many months, there is also a little spark of hope. And that is the place where Israelis are hovering right now.
How deliverable is this deal, do you think, Noga? We've often spoken, you and I, about the difficulty that Prime Minister Netanyahu has with bringing his government along. He's tied to some of the more extreme members of his government. What have we heard from them about this 20-point plan?
Look, Netanyahu is safe in this respect. His the two most notoriously extremist members of his cabinet, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, both put out statements last night harshly criticizing the prime minister, but neither threatened to leave, not at this moment. And it's important to remember that for all of the talk we hear very often about how Netanyahu is being dragged to the extreme right by them and other ministers, the fact of the matter is that they have these two, the real extremists, they have no path to power if it's not through Benjamin Netanyahu. There's no other current party leader in Israel who would ever contemplate sitting with them in a government. And so they have a very significant interest in holding on to their seats for now. And that has come into play. Netanyahu also has the assurance of the leader of the Israeli opposition that if he loses the support of his cabinet, the opposition will support any deal to end the war and bring the hostages home. So Netanyahu is very safe, but he is not acting like somebody that safe. He's acting like someone with serious concerns about his hold on power, and he's very much trying to consolidate his hold on power in many different ways. And what has happened this week has really been quite a shock, quite a hiccup. It was about a week ago, at the end of last week, when Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a speech at the UN, Friday, it was, when he said, this war is absolutely not over, our task isn't over, our job's not done, and we're going to finish the job. And then it was Monday, so 2.5 days later, when he stood by Donald Trump and said, I accept these parameters. He was not offered a choice. And that is the arena that he's trying to navigate right now.
Noga, before we go, what can you tell us about that intercepted flotilla that was heading with aid towards Gaza? It was intercepted by the Israeli Navy. What's happened to the people that were apprehended from the boats? Do we know?
So we have different reports. Several hundred of them have already been deported. And Turkey was talking about sending a plane for their citizens and possible others. But what did happen, and this is a clash between exactly the kind of ministers you and I were just talking about and the real world, is that these activists were not held in detention like others have been outside of Ben Gurion Airport. They were actually taken by the Israeli Prison Service, and that is under the hand of Itamar Ben-Gvir, this very, very extremist minister, someone with 13 convictions for hate crimes and terror associations in his past. This is obviously his first ministry. He's never held power, and he really enjoys goading them and everyone. So he went to visit some of these activists in detention. He videotaped himself mocking them, making fun of them. And Israel, that is not, an activist group, but a sovereign country, has gotten into significant trouble over it. That said, you also hear things that are clearly exaggerated statements from the activists, like accusations that Israel committed a war crime by stopping their flotilla. And other accusations, and I assume you're asking specifically about Greta Thunberg. I don't really know what happened. There have been claims that she was dragged by her hair, that she was really abused by Israeli prison wardens. The Israeli Foreign Ministry put out a statement, but not a very serious statement, a kind of light statement saying that never happened and these are all anti-Semites. So I don't know what really happened specifically regarding her.
Noga, as ever, thank you so much for giving us all this time. Really good to speak. Noga Tarnopolsky there, Israeli-Palestinian journalist based in Jerusalem, someone we often speak with on the show.